Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craft World, Aeldari.com. I'm Brent, and in this video, I am going to be reviewing the impact on Aeldari of the March 2025 Balanced Dataslate update. And if you're new to 40K, you might not know that several times a year, GW puts out these updates. They change some points values, they change from some rules, all with an eye towards maintaining game balance. So I'll run you through the changes, and I'll leave you with some thoughts on them. The short version is most of the news is not great. Most of the Aspect Warriors got some kind of points hike. Wave Serpents also got a points hike. Asurmen's Hand of Azurian ability got a minor nerf. And they clarified that Ynnari can in fact ride around in Falcons and Wave Serpents, which I think we knew anyway, but people were arguing about. And Corsairs do get battle focus now, which is like the only good news. And they obviously always should have had battle focus. They're quick, they're pirates. So the nerf to Asurmen, his Hand of Azurian ability, where once per game he jacks his damage output and he's like super good at shooting stuff. Now instead of triggering anti-infantry on a 3-up, it triggers anti-infantry on a 5-up. This doesn't really matter against most targets. Most stuff he was wounding on a 3-up before anyway. But like against something like Gazgal Thraka, we feel the loss. It was nice to be able to push through some dev wounds. I think this change is kind of fine. He's still very good. The most important thing he does anyway, I think, is the combination of his pretty good shooting and the shoot and scoot, which is untouched. That is, for you newer players, when he's leading a unit of Dire Avengers, they can move immediately after shooting, and they can use that move to disappear out of line of sight or jump back in a transport. Okay, points changes. Fire Dragons are up 10 points per squad of 5. I fully expected this change from the moment the codex dropped. I was sure that they would get a points increase, and I was sure that it would be 10 points. As dragons are arguably the best hard target elimination tool in the game at close range. This is not inappropriate. It's not unreasonable. So 5 are now 110. Wave Serpents are up from 115 to 125. I mostly feel the same way about this one. The Wave Serpent was a competitive for Aeldari. It was a competitively pointed unit. Most lists are seeing 1 or 2. And the little durability buff that it got in this edition maybe warrants that small increase. I do think that because most factions have access to cheaper transports, it would have been okay to leave this one alone, but it's kind of, again, this is one that's kind of fine. Dark Reapers did not receive a points increase to the 5 elf squads, but the 10 elf squads have gone up 15 points, which is considerable. And this is because there are so many synergies in specifically an aspect host and war host with big units of Reapers disappearing into a transport or disappearing back through a wall and having good damage output and just kind of being untouchable. But you can only really do it with one big unit. So they're disincentivizing the big units a little bit while not touching the smaller ones. I guess this is kind of fine. I'm really glad that they left the 5 elf units alone. I've been finding 5 elf units of Reapers spread out in my backfield, both for screening purposes and to add indirect fire in the early game and target elimination in the mid to late game, to be at least as useful as those 10 elf squads. So I'm fine with this, I guess, but it is still, I think, a little bit of a bummer for people who just bought 10 Reapers and gave 9 of them the Reaper launcher so that they could run them as a squad of 10. But it's fine, I guess. The last 2 changes make no sense to me. Striking Scorpions are up 10 points from 75 points to 85 points for a squad of 5. Now, Scorpions are very good. The ability to both deploy to the midfield and then move before the game begins has enabled Scorpions to do, in my opinion, for the first time in all of 40K history, the thing that Scorpions are supposed to do in the lore, which is to be ambushers who screen your army. Because previously, if they just deployed to the midfield, if you got first turn, maybe they behaved like striking Scorpions. Otherwise, they were just immediately killed by the enemy, ineffective ambushers, and possibly even provided springboards for your opponent's long bomb melee units that could, make a move on turn 1 and get more movement by charging your Scorpions. So the ability to move before the game begins. So if you go first, they jump up in your opponent's grill and they can mess up some infantry if your opponent doesn't screen the infantry and screen and stop your opponent from moving. Or if you go second, they fall back and they screen your army and they counterpunch. That's great. But I also think that they were perfectly reasonably pointed before. they're still good. I mean, Aeldari relies so much on being able to control an opponent's movement that we're still going to want Scorpions. I might go from having them be like a 2-up, almost auto-include, to a 1-up. Maybe one of those units of Scorpions is going to turn into a unit of Rangers to ameliorate some of these other points increases. I don't know. But they're more expensive. They're still good, but it's no longer like at 75 points, they were a really feel-good include. I was like, yeah, Scorpions, this cheap skirmishy unit with their biting blade and their badassery. But now it's like still good, but I also feel the loss of them a little bit more when they just inevitably bite it right away. Dire Avengers are up 5 points from 75 points to 80 points. This one I think is wackadoo. I assume that it's because almost every list getting onto GT podiums is running Asurmen and 5 Dire Avengers. But I don't think that Asurmen and 5 Dire Avengers were an inappropriately pointed Aeldari tool before. Just because they're a good tool doesn't mean they're inappropriately pointed. And it's kind of a bummer to punish all Dire Avengers for that one kind of effective combo. I would much rather they have raised Asurmen's cost 5 points, so every squad of Dire Avengers is not taxed. But I assume that was not desirable because he's already significantly more expensive than the other Phoenix Lords. And if you just look at his data sheet, it becomes hard to justify. I feel like they could have left this alone. But it's fine. It's only 5 points. Even though at 75 points, again, the Dire Avengers were like, I felt good about that, like, by Eldar standards, that slimly costed include. It was just kind of like a feel-good list-building thing. Okay, so overall thoughts. And I will just simply say this is an elf positive, GW positive channel, and none of this is really that big a deal. I think that the increases to fire dragons in particular, like totally appropriate. And I guess I'm kind of like fine with the wave serpent thing, but I do think that compared to some of the other nuanced stuff that we've seen from GW in this edition, this one does feel a little bit clumsy to me, and I kind of don't like it overall because I think it's punishing newer players and lower level Aeldari players for the success of really skilled players who are running Ynnari effectively in GTs. So here's what's going on. Of all of the detachments, the only detachment that has an arguably inappropriately high win rate is Ynnari. Ynnari are winning like somewhere around 62% of their games. Now, that said, they're not winning a ton of GTs, but they're getting onto some podiums. They do occasionally win GTs, and high-level players are having tremendous success with Ynnari. But I think that the Ynnari win rate is somewhat inflated by the fact that they are, at least at the very big, highly competitive tournaments, primarily only being run by people who are also very, very good, who are going to have inappropriately high win rates themselves no matter what. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't maybe have made sense to rein the Ynnari movement shenanigans in a bit. I don't even know. I'm not sure. I'm not confident enough in the data about the skill level of the players running the things, but maybe it would have made sense to do that. But instead, it feels like GW looked at, this elf detachment is doing particularly well. Let's look at which elf units are universally appearing in effective lists and nerfed those. So what they did was they nerfed all of the go-to stuff for people running Aspect Host, because that is the detachment run most frequently. In the big tournaments, the most common Aeldari detachment is Aspect Host. It's the easiest to have some success with. It had about a 56% win rate, which is really not bad. Again, given that Aeldari tend to attract high skill cap players, high skill level players anyway, I kind of feel like a 56% win rate for an Aeldari detachment, those couple of extra percentage points I think are probably coming from the skill level of people gravitating towards the faction. I kind of think that was fine. But it was also the most approachable, easiest detachment to run for newer players, and it feels like they took the thing that the less skilled newer players are doing out behind the barn and broke, like, not its thumbs, but like a pinky finger, and like dislocated a ring finger, while the Space Elf Sun Tzus, who have arguably slightly inappropriately high win rates with Death Elves, have been completely left alone, because this is not the stuff that we're seeing in those Ynnari detachments that's been nerfed. So they made life harder for entry-level Space Elf players while leaving what might be the problem detachment alone, and that is frustrating a bit. And I think I would have been less critical if the points increases to the units that got points increases were balanced out by points decreases to some of the units that have been struggling. Shining Spears are too expensive. It is a good unit, but it is obviously objectively too expensive, except maybe in a Wind Rider host, and we're not seeing a ton of those, but we might now. But I think Shining Spears could have come down 10 points. Some of the Wraith units are too expensive. Wraith Blades and Wraith Knights are too expensive. They should get decreases. Fire Prisms could have come down. So I just think that if there had been some comparable reductions, this would be a little bit less of a slate feel bad moment. So there it is, some loving, constructive criticism. But overall, it's not that big a deal. Elves are still good. Nobody's list is completely ruined. 2 of my lists went up like 80 points, so I have to completely rethink them. But it's like, nah, it's fine. I do think that this is yet more incentive to swerve away from Aspect Host and try some of the other stuff out. I'm pretty excited about Seer Council. I mentioned when the Codex dropped that was the one I was most excited about running, but I started with Aspect Host and War Host to get the hang of things just because they're easier. But I think Seer Council is good when it's really carefully run. It's just incredibly unforgiving. And I actually think Wind Rider Host, if you have the models for it, can be fabulous. And Aspect Host is certainly still good. But I will say that I was feeling a little bit in my matchups with people who are, good players running good armies. It was fine, but before I felt like I had exactly enough on the field. Like, take away one tool, and now I feel like I'm playing at a deficit. And so I have to rethink my tools because because this is going to take away one tool cumulatively. Now, I'll just close out by saying, obviously, in order to really thoroughly consider the effect of any sort of balance update on an individual faction, you have to consider how all of the other factions have changed too. And I'm not really looking at that in this. So maybe, who knows, if some of Aeldari's biggest competitors, like the armies that are hardest to play into and the detachments that are hardest to play into, if they got the right kinds of nerfs, then maybe all this is less of an issue. And even if they didn't, it's all kind of still fine. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little salty about this one. So that's what I've got. If you have your own thoughts on the March Dataslate update, please leave those in the comments below. Maybe you could tell us how you're making changes to your lists, or just say hi to help the algorithm. I apologize for the lack of more dynamic visuals in this one. I don't know how many of you look at those anyway, but I wanted to get it out same day, and I didn't have time for video editing. I think most people just listen anyway while they paint or drive, but nevertheless, that's what I've got. Back again soon with something new. Take care. Bye.